Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hi, Allegra.
Hello. Sorry about
um,
that mishap.
yeah, no, it's all good, everyone. Allegra accidentally tweeted out our tweeted. Who says
I'm
that
like,
anymore?
babe, I'm not on Twitter. Let's make one thing clear.
I don't know why I said that. Allegra shared on Instagram the link to come backstage with us, which, as much as we'd love to have you backstage,
Listen.
just hang out with us, get a couch. She re-shared it. So if you're watching this, you probably found the link. But if you have somebody that you know that you want to share this with, it's iocdf.org/live streams to watch us live. But welcome, welcome on this beautiful Wednesday. So my name's Chris Trondsen. I'm your host for Ask the Experts. And today is a live stream. We're here every Wednesday at 12 Eastern or 9 Pacific on the West Coast time. Ran a little bit late today because we're getting all that situated, but we are here. We're going to be here for an hour. We're going to hang out with you. And the live streams are really just an opportunity for you to meet and kind of talk to other people in the chat. We are live streaming on all different platforms, including Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. So definitely come join us on any of those and hang out and comment and engage with everybody. And we always like to find out where are people joining us from. So if you let us know in the comments, like where are you located? Are you here to support yourself? Are you a clinician? Are you somebody, married to somebody with OCD? Do you have OCD? We'd always love to hear that. So definitely let us know where you're from and joining us. Real quick announcement, and then I'm going to introduce our guest. As always, this live stream is not intended to provide therapy or to take place of an emergency situation. So if you are watching this but in a crisis, absolutely please instead, you could call 988 911, go to a local emergency room, go to 988lifeline.org, or reach out to your provider. But make sure you're keeping comments respectful. We're on all these different platforms, and thanks for hanging us out. So the guest today is one of my closest friends, one of my favorite people on the planet, who is incredible for this community, Allegra Caston. So Allegra, welcome. How you doing today?
Hello, I'm good. I'm so sorry about that mishap. Had to get my coffee. Did you get your caffeine?
I did.
Okay,
I was like, please just ingest me
the
with
gays
green
need
tea.
their caffeine.
Straight to my soul. So I want to kind of instead of doing like a robotic intro, because we're friends, I was like, oh, I want to chit chat. So tell us a little bit for the people watching, because you're going to be with us for the hour. You had your own OCD experience. I'm going to ask you some questions about that in a second. But what drove you to becoming a therapist? What had you become full circle after you were getting, treatment for yourself?
That's such a fantastic question. So I also struggled with eating disorders before the onset of my OCD. And so I worked in talent PR in Los Angeles from like 19 to it was like 25 or 26. And at around, I would say age 22, after receiving therapy and getting help with my OCD, and I found a therapist who really changed my life. I decided that I wanted something more meaningful than talent PR. It was kind of like glorified babysitting, which is wonderful, but it just wasn't meaningful in the way that I wanted it to be. So I decided to go back to school to pursue being a therapist, but I only wanted to work with eating disorders. At first, I was like, if I hear anything else about OCD, that's it. Like I can't, and I didn't want other clients' obsessions to stick in my brain. So initially it was just like go back to school, work with eating disorders, and still help people. And then naturally, because this was always going to happen, I felt very inspired and called to working with OCD. So I kind of just took that leap, and I am not at all afraid of my clients' obsessions. I'm like, if you've thought it, I've thought it times 100 million. Okay. If you've thought it, I've thought way worse. So it is really rewarding, and it's not the scary thing I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. Like I every time somebody's like, this is gonna sound crazy, I was like,
You're like,
wow. I'm like, you thought that, man. I took it 10 times
yeah.
further. So it's always like that.
And then I love it. It's like the most mild thing too. They're like, buckle up, babe. And I'm like, strapped in. I'm like, what is it? Then they're like, I had a thought about the dog. I'm like, sweetie pie.
No, for sure. Well, it's funny because like we kind of have parallel stories. Like I was working in entertainment, still love it and everything, but I wanted something more meaningful. I think for me too, I don't know if you felt this way, but I think one of the things that drove me to this field is like I was so shocked. I mean, you and I luckily both got good care, but I was so shocked at how still there's not a lot of providers for the
Yeah.
amount of people suffering.
Not a lot of providers, and also not a lot of people who talk about their lived experience with POCD. That's also what really called me to wanting to pursue a career as a therapist and even just an advocate and educator. I really wanted to offer people what I didn't have available to me when I was struggling.
Yeah, and do you feel, I mean, one of the things that I always feel is like when you can have those conversations in session, I think sometimes it's the first time somebody's opened up about having these thoughts. What relief do you see in your clients when they're like able to talk to you about these really intrusive taboo thoughts, sexual thoughts, harm thoughts, and not feel judged or ridiculed? Or I had a client, she had a therapist call CPS on her because she talked about harm thoughts with her child. So what do you see when people are able to open up?
So much relief, so much like this wasn't like they didn't react in the way that I thought they would. So that's one thing is there's often a fear that the therapist is going to judge, think they're crazy, report them. And then when they see my reaction, which is like basically that was it. Like I validate their sharing, but it's like, yeah, that's a thought, and it really just comforts them. And I also think that it helps eliminate shame. I just recently did this with a client of mine where I had them write down a couple of their really scary thoughts on a piece of paper and hand it to me. They had never written those down, shared them with anyone. And they came back the next session saying, I just felt such a relief, like so much release from that. I felt less weighed down and I feel like it helped with the shame a little bit. So I love what Brene Brown says about shame, that I think it thrives in secrecy. So when someone is able to come in and say, these are the thoughts that I'm having, this is my experience, it really can help with that shame.
Yeah, if we could talk, and this is why I love that you're on today, because I feel like I could go deep with you and you could talk both about clients, but also lived experience. You just kind of touched something like living in that darkness. One of the things I constantly see it not talked about, and I feel like you, myself, some other people have kind of led the way, and you talk about it a lot on your platform. Talk just a little bit about that darkness, because I think we are afraid to go there, right? I think a lot of people don't understand OCD. And so when people are having suicidality, or if people are like really just getting over isolating themselves for 5 years or not seeing half of their family because of intrusive thoughts. Can you talk about either your own experience or clients' experience about that kind of like shame piece, that darkness, that isolation that, people with OCD
Yeah.
often feel?
So all OCD is hard. I want to start with that. And I really do want to validate that. But something that I also simultaneously validate for clients is I think with POCD, especially, there is an added layer of shame and stigma that some other obsessional themes don't experience as much. And so with POCD, when you are so worried that you are a pedophile, even though you're like, I'm not, but I can't understand why I'm having these thoughts. I think that in society, being a pedophile, rightfully so, is like the worst thing a person could be. I would say that most people would think that. Like, you maybe can get away with murder. You are definitely never getting away with pedophilia. Again, rightfully so. And so I think for people who struggle with POCD, it becomes this like ultimate, I can't tell anyone. Because if I do tell someone, they're going to think that I'm a monster, that I'm a predator, that I can't be a mother, that I shouldn't be around children. And that for me kept me stuck without a diagnosis for so long. Like I went to a medical doctor. I mean, I just, in trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and I was never honest with my experience and I was never honest about my symptoms for that reason. So it did create so much isolation. And even when I did start treatment, I still felt so much shame. Like I'm writing my book now and it's not funny, but it's just looking back, it's like the level of, actually, you know what? This also will be, I think, helpful in a little experimental exercise. So I put this on my Instagram. I'm like, sorry that you're all going to see my, the light on my ceiling. Okay. If you want to talk about like shame and secrecy, I kept, and I know someone here is going to relate to this. I kept all of my old phones. I don't know if anyone has done this.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was like, if, these were the phones that I used when I was really sick. And what if I wrote down a thought and it's in this phone and then I'm going to turn it back into the Apple store and they're going to turn it on and they're going to be like, oh my God, this girl's a pedophile. So like literally this phone is I don't know, it's breaking basically. Like it's like, and I've carried it over the last 6 years to 5 different apartments and homes across the country and back. That's the level of shame that I was experiencing. Like literally nobody can find out about this, to the point where I'm now like hoarding devices because I'm so afraid that someone is going to find out. Cut to now, obviously I'm writing a memoir, so everyone knows and everyone's going to find out. But imagine being that afraid of your own brain that you feel like you can't even return technological devices.
You know what's crazy? So I totally forgot to call you. So I saw your post, and one of the things I used to do, like before turning in a phone, because I was so afraid, same as you, like I said something wrong, I downloaded something that I didn't realize I downloaded, and I used to literally, like, you know, when you turn in your device, you like wipe it. But then I would keep like going back and forth. Like I'd wipe it, but then sign back in, and wipe it and sign it back in. And then I swear the people at Apple wanted to like erase my existence, because I'd be like, are you sure it's deleted? Are you sure? And then, okay, this is so embarrassing. I've never admitted this.
Nothing's embarrassing here.
OCD always has you lie. So when I would submit it, I'm like, I'm a doctor, and because of HIPAA, I have my patient's contact. It has to be wiped out. And like 2 times when I turn in phones, the guy's like, oh, I have this thing that can like super wipe it. And you know, the old ones used to have SIM cards. So he gives me the SIM card. He wipes my phone. I'm going home. I'm like hammering the SIM card. Meanwhile, like all I have is like pictures of my dogs and like people I think are cute. But like in my head, I'm like, there's all this craziness. But I'm glad that you're so open about your experience, because I think that's one of the things that people like love about you and yearn, is just like sameness and community and open, because we do these things that in retrospect we look back and we're like, what the hell? But you mentioned something that I want to talk about, your book. How you feeling, author?
You know, I'm really excited. It's the most meaningful thing I've ever done, but also it's the hardest thing I've ever done career-wise. Obviously, living with OCD was 8 million times harder, but writing a book and writing a memoir in particular is so hard. I was just telling my therapist that I feel like people shit on memoir. It's not as literary to them. And it's like, you're making up stuff when it's fiction, right? Like you have free imagination to make up a story. I am having to take the very real and traumatizing things that have happened to me and turn it into art and craft it and to make it a story. And to me, I think that that almost requires more skill. Not that I love novels, obviously I love literature, but it's really hard. So when people think that memoir is just like navel gazing and whatever it might be, like, no, it's really difficult. So I have missed a few deadlines, which I'm being really kind to myself about, because this story is just too important to me to rush. And I think I've needed a little bit longer than maybe I was given. So, but I'm really excited. I honestly have like, I don't really have any fears putting it out into the world, which is wild to say, given the fact that I was so afraid to turn these phones in. With my therapist in treatment, like she would have me write down thoughts on sticky notes and she'd be like, put them in the trash can. I was like, are you going to go back and read those? Why is my therapist dumpster diving in her office? She's obviously not. And then I'd be like, wait, the trash guy is going to read them. I'd be like ripping them up in her office. Like that's how afraid I was. And now I'm writing a memoir for the world. So I hope that that just shows how much recovery is possible.
Yeah, when you're reflecting, right, when you're writing this, and even if you haven't written this down yet, but you're probably going through like all the years you had, is there ever a moment that you think back to that you're like, I wish current Allegra could go back there, like sit down and just have a talk with yourself? Because I think we all have had those moments where you're just at like a low moment and you just don't know what's going on in your head and your body and your world. When you've been kind of reflecting, is there a moment that you're like, man, I wish I could sit down with my old self and like hold her hand, just be like, you're in it right now, you're going to get through it?
Who cut the onions? Because
I know, I started watering.
I'm like, is someone, I'm like, Ruby, stop chopping in the kitchen. Mom is working. I would say a couple of different moments, one of which I write about deeply in the book, and I'm not going to share here just because I feel like I'm not at that place where I want to share about it. But
yeah, of course,
there was something that I did that I thought would get rid of my OCD that really traumatized me, and it created a relationship with something and with other people for a long time that that was really traumatizing. So I wish I could go back to that moment and say, like, I get that you're desperate, but this thing that you are about to do is not going to help you at all. It's really going to hurt you. And then I would say, like, right at the onset of my OCD, I wish that I could tell myself, like, this is OCD. You are not a terrible person. You're not a monster. You're going to be a mother. You're going to, have the life of your dreams. I really wish that I could offer that to myself.
I think what's crazy, I don't know if you recognize this, but like, I think I've always said people in this community are going to be the people that really help share the word. And there's probably so many people that found out that they had OCD because of you. So what has that been like for people when they've sent you DMs or have reached out and just said like, yo, I didn't know what I was going through as OCD and I didn't suffer as many years that you unfortunately had to suffer because I saw your post or because I heard you on a podcast?
It literally just, I mean, it warms my heart in a way that I can't even describe. I got this message a couple of weeks ago from someone who listened to my episode with Glennon Doyle, and she said that I'm going to have to explain this doing math at the ripe hour of 9:25, but her mom listened to the episode and then talked to this person who messaged me, and they both shared their experience with intrusive thoughts. So there was two different generations saying, wait, I've experienced this. And then the mom, I think, who found the episode also said, oh my goodness, my mom struggled with this. So like just me sharing that story unlocked 3 different generations of people opening up about their intrusive thoughts. And that to me was just like the most meaningful thing in the world. It never ceases to amaze me. And every time I get one of those messages, I'm just like, what I do matters, and it helps people, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, I was so moved. Like, obviously, we're both friends with Maids of Millions. Why did I just butcher it? Made of Millions.
There's something else I add an S on too that I shouldn't. Yeah, and same. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna figure it out.
Made of Millions, but no, they put out that they're finding that some people are getting treatment as soon as 2.5 years after symptoms. And I think that's so good. Like that's moving to me, seeing that they did a big like study of their all the people that follow them and stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's been taking people like 2.5 years. I know I've started to have clients come in that are like, yeah, I started suffering with OCD like a year ago and just found out what I had. So how does that feel, seeing like our field starting to get people help sooner? Because I think when you and I, we didn't have symptoms and then get treatment 6 months later, like some people are now.
We were in the boonies. And I will also say, like, I think it was 15 to 16 months after my onset, I started going to therapy, which I know is relatively, like, that is faster than a lot of people, but I didn't get OCD specific therapy that changed my life for like probably 3 years into my symptoms. So even me, sometimes I'm like, wow, that 15 months is miraculous compared to some people who go 10 years, but like 15 months, like I was at the end of my rope. People who go 10 years, I have so much respect for. And I'm so glad that time between symptom onset and diagnosis and treatment is diminishing, because that period of not knowing when you think something is wildly wrong with you is like the scariest thing to go through.
Yeah. And it's so sad. I mean, when you see people that come in a lot older and you're just like, man, you've lived almost your whole life with this. And I think, it just so let's talk a little bit about like eating. One of the things that we had talked about is it's Eating Disorders Awareness Week, right? Week or okay. I want to make sure. I was trying to remember, is it day or week or month? I always kind of forget. But yeah, I mean, for that, there's a lot of co-occurring disorders. And I think that almost always people that have experienced OCD are also experiencing panic attacks, maybe body dysmorphic disorder, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and stuff. We know that OCD and eating disorders have a huge crossover. I know that you also treat eating disorders. What are some of the things that you see in people that have both OCD and eating disorders? Like, how do those two disorders sort of not complement in a positive way, but kind of coexist with each other?
Well, I would say that first and foremost, OCD can look like an eating disorder, and an eating disorder can look like OCD. So it's really important to do a thorough assessment to understand what is what. Something that I commonly say that's not talked about enough, and I'll use my own lived experience with this. I initially had anorexia, and then I had a sudden onset of OCD. That onset of OCD this is going to sound so woo-woo, but like, it was like my brain just flipped to being afraid of these sexual thoughts that I was having, and I just couldn't be fixated on food. So I started eating more when I had the onset of my OCD. And at that point, I tried to force anorexia again, because anorexia was so much easier than OCD. And that sounds wild if you really think about it, like how sick I was physically and mentally, like that was cake compared to my OCD experience. So sometimes people develop eating disorders as a way to like distract from OCD, It's something to fixate on besides obsessional themes. And I see that in my practice. I get clients who come in with an eating disorder and with OCD. And then sometimes clinicians will say, okay, we have to do the eating disorder first. But if the client is coming in and saying, well, the eating disorder, I'm maintaining it in part so that I don't have to think about these scary sexual thoughts, it seems like the root of it is the scary sexual thoughts. So both have to be worked on simultaneously.
Yeah.
Eating disorders can be like, they can start out as just self-punishment for unwanted intrusive thoughts, and then that can turn into a full-blown eating disorder. I know a couple of people whose eating disorders went, what's the word I'm looking for? They had an onset of eating disorders after POCD. So really looking at like, is this a form of self-punishment that then falls into eating disorder territory? Are we maintaining this because we don't want to think about OCD, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's tough because I think a lot of times people are trying to find treatment, and most of us, I don't know about, well, obviously I know about you, but, and me too. I think part of us is like wanting to learn how to help clients with coexisting conditions. Because I think one of the things that you just said is hard is like when a client comes in with OCD and an eating disorder, or OCD and PTSD, and if they can't get help, whether it's like the clinician doesn't recognize it, or the clinician doesn't like refer out or can treat both. A lot of times people feel like you're saying they're treating one thing, but this other thing gets louder, and then they run to that and back and forth. How did you find the right team for you to really help you with what you're going through?
So I would say do as I say, not as I do. I
Yeah.
never got, and this is not uncommon, so I do want to say this, but I never got eating disorder specific treatment. I started eating again when I had the severe onset of OCD, and that kind of was its own like ERP. The more that I ate, the less scary and dangerous it felt. I relapsed again in anorexia a few years later, and again, I just like recovered over time through eating more. I obviously and I have worked on my eating disorder in therapy now, but I never received specific treatment. I would say don't do that. Again, it's not uncommon. Like my dietitian who I see now never got eating disorder specific treatment, and she's in recovery, but I didn't look for a provider who was specialized in the treatment of both, because honestly, I think also the OCD was so debilitating that I just was not focused on the anorexia when I relapsed. It's like, I couldn't give a shit about this thing. Like, I feel like I'm about to die because of OCD. I need to figure that out. And
Yeah.
I would say another thing that contributed to that is like the eating disorder was more egocentric to me. We live in a world that is very body focused, that really praises people for being thin and praises weight loss. So to me, it was just less ego dystonic, and it felt like this is kind of what the world wants of me. So I'm not as bothered by it.
Yeah, that's what's difficult too about messaging. I see that in BDD. We also see that with people with OCD and perfectionism. It's like the messaging is like, oh, you're working hard, you're staying late, all your projects are perfect. And so it's like, you're getting A's, you're getting into colleges. And I think that's a hard part too, is like a lot of times society or parents reinforce some of these things, and that could be difficult. Also, can you talk about, I think one thing that I see also sometimes is like parents or family members with undiagnosed OCD themselves. And then it's like the person comes in and they're like, I've had it where they're confused because their parents are reinforcing some of the behavior, because it's like the parents have the same type of OCD.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so can you talk a little bit about like if somebody's watching and maybe they grew up in a house with OCD, or they have it in their family, like why is recovery so important? What does recovery mean to you? And why has it been just like one of the greatest things, if people either because their family having it or maybe they're scared, why do people have to get help?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with like what we grow up with, we tend to think is the norm because it's all that we know. I remember like until I started therapy at 21 and I started to talk about my upbringing, and my therapist would be like, do you know that that's not like, I'm like, that's not normal. Don't all parents do this? They don't. So if it's, let's say in the context of OCD or an eating disorder, maybe that's normal to the person because that's what they grew up with, but that doesn't mean that that's normative in terms of what's healthy for a person. And it can be hard when you have a parent reinforcing either eating disorder behaviors or OCD behaviors because they're stuck in their own symptoms or because they think that is the best thing for someone. I mean, recovery is so important, I would say, for a million and one reasons, but it gave me my life back. It gave me my sanity back. It gave me everything back. And I don't think I would be alive if I didn't get to a place of recovery. I can't think of one reason why. I don't know what I was about to say there, but yeah, I mean, recovery is just life changing.
What was like one of the first moments that you're like, hey, I'm getting better? Like, do you remember
Oh
like
yeah,
something?
I sure do. Yes.
Okay, I want to hear. I want to hear.
So this is an iconic moment. So I would come into my OCD specialist office and I was so severe. I would like shake on the couch because I was crying so much. And she used to say, like, you need to chill, which I know is not like, it's not necessarily therapeutic, but listen, I needed that divine intervention. I needed someone to just be like, get your shit together, kind of. But I remember I was sobbing before I graduated from my undergrad program. And that was a really big deal to me because I medically withdrew because of my OCD. I couldn't read. I couldn't watch movies for my film class because when I was reading, it was like my sexual intrusive thoughts would morph into the words on the page. I didn't like going to class. So eventually going back to school and finishing was like the biggest deal to me. And I just wanted to go to my graduation and not have intrusive thoughts. That was my whole thing. Can I just have this one day of no thoughts? And I was sobbing and begging. And my therapist said, like, no, unfortunately, you can't. And really honed in on the practice of acceptance. And that was like the day that it kind of clicked for me. I went to graduation and the thoughts about like fucking my cousin were there and whatever it might be. And I allowed them to be there. I redirected back to graduation and I actually had a really meaningful graduation day. And that was just such a game changer in my treatment. I think that her honesty and sternness and just like, you are having these thoughts, you can't do anything about them, but practice acceptance, like that was a huge moment of change for me.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I saw the picture of you at your house at graduation. You just look so happy, and so it's cool to notice because I know like a lot of times we take pictures and we're fake smiling because what's going on inside is so painful. So to see that you were like actually like thriving in that moment, having such a good experience, it's incredible.
Yeah. And I'll say to that, I don't know if anyone else can relate, but I deleted so many Instagram pictures, like from when I was really struggling, because I could look at a picture and I could tell you what I was thinking about, what I was feeling. I could almost feel that feeling internally. So if anybody else has struggled with that too, that was definitely a thing for me.
Yeah, my sister always says that. She's like, I can tell when you were suffering because she'll see a picture. She's like, that's when you were struggling. Like, there's just something about us. What's something that you missed about you, but you got back in recovery? So what I mean by that, it could be like an activity or a part of your personality. Because one of the things that I talk to clients a lot about is like OCD is on a smear campaign against you, babe.
Yeah.
Like, it's telling you you hate your God. It's telling you want to hurt people. It's telling you all these things. It's on a smear campaign, has a marketing director, it has a social media director.
Like it's everything. Everything.
It has like connections at news outlets. Like it is on a smear campaign.
Telling stories to the tabloids. You're on
sure. 100%. So like, I'm working with a client with like moral scroop and I'm like, babe, like OCD is out there to tell people that you are like the worst human being in the world. You are the Karen of the world. Like you're out there just like making people miserable, right? And I think what happens is if people aren't getting treatment over time, they start to believe it. Like I'm a harmful person, I'm hurtful, I'm mean, I'm evil, right? What's something like, whether it was like a thing you were doing or just about yourself, did you have like, man, I feel like Allegra again. I'm starting to feel like myself.
I mean, I would say wanting to be a mom for sure. That is like something I've wanted my entire life. It's the first thing I knew about myself, even when I was like 3 years old, that I was born to be a mom. And then when I had the onset of my OCD, it became like, I just can never be a mom because I'm having these thoughts. Even if I don't believe them, the mere fact that I'm experiencing them is going to make me not be able to be a mom. So I kind of gave up on that dream. And then in recovery, I am now fiending for a baby. So I'm like,
the reason I'm laughing, the way you said it is like, it sounds like you're going to go to TJ Maxx and pick one up after this.
I am. I'm cruising down the street.
Because I'll be like, I'm feeding for some El Pollo Loco. And I'm like, Allegra's like, yeah, that's cute, but I'm getting a baby.
I'm like, how honest can I be on these dating apps? I have to be like, would like to conceive right away.
It's all, would you like to go get coffee? No, I want a child.
No,
I
I
didn't
want
know your name. I want to jump in questions, but before that, what do you feel? Obviously, we know that there's a huge behavioral component to treatment, but for you personally, like, what did you find? Maybe this isn't the right terminology, but what did you find helped quiet your mind, allowing you to just say, like, hey, I'm getting a lot in my head, but I don't need to go there anymore. I don't need to engage. I don't need to make this sort of my running stream. Like, what helped you kind of quiet your mind?
Great psychoeducation about OCD, metacognitive therapy. So thinking differently about my thinking, like learning that feelings are not facts, that OCD can feel very real, and that it feeling real doesn't mean that we are in danger. And then a lot of mindfulness skills training. Because for me, yes, there were obviously times when I believed that the obsessions were true, but a great deal of my OCD suffering was not wanting to experience the unwanted thoughts and feeling a lot of shame about it. And I did everything in my power all the time to not have those thoughts. So mindfulness skills training and diffusion and ACT really helped me accept the presence of whatever it was my brain was producing without judgment and without resistance. And that helped me not engage. Like I could see, this is a thought that I'm having. I don't need to attend to this.
I love that you mentioned mindfulness, because I always say, like, when people ask like what helped in recovery, it was I do martial arts. I need to get back into it, but I did martial arts.
I'm like, wait, when did you? I don't know about this martial arts.
I did it my whole life, and then I stopped because of the pandemic, and then it just like was hard to get back into it because everything shut down. But they focused a lot on mindfulness. Like when we get into the dojo, like the sensei would have us imagine like all of our struggles and our problems, and like put them in a bag like outside the studio, and when you come in here you're just focusing. And I think, you know, with obviously like the physical ailment, the breathing ailment, like I just felt centered there, and I'd leave and I'd be like, I ain't picking that bag back up. But for me, that helped quiet my mind. I was like, look, like there's a world in front of me, there's experiences currently that I could have. I don't need to just be in my head all day and just observe how crummy my thoughts are. So that was so helpful as well.
We have a little visitor.
Aw, that's little Coco.
Coco. It's like, if you don't let me outside, I'm wreaking havoc.
Oh my God, before I get into questions, do you feel like dogs helped, or well, pets? I'll say pets because some people can't have dogs. I know for me, like I felt, well, some people like chinchillas and like lizards and I've like spiders and stuff. But for me, like I felt like my dog was so helpful for facing OCD, getting out of the house, depression. So did you feel that way?
Unfortunately, no, because my OCD latched on. Coco's like, actually, I'm going to tell this story. So my mom was afraid that no. So when I got Coco, I had so many intrusive thoughts about her. And not only was having a puppy in general is really hard. And I was 21 years old and I was the youngest person that the rescue adopted to. And I was in over my head, but then having sexual thoughts about her, I wanted to get rid of her. Like I remember trying everything I could and my parents wouldn't take her. And so I was kind of stuck with her, which obviously is the best thing to ever happen to me. But no, having a dog, my OCD made that 1,000,001 times worse. Not anymore, which I think is also recovery. Like I don't have thoughts about them. I don't get afraid of them. I just need them to stop eating the plants. That would be our only that would be our only concern as of right now.
I love them. They're so cute. Except when I was trying to sleep on your couch and Coco just like sat on my head and was like, this is my bed. Like, this is my area. Well, we have a ton of questions, so I want to jump in. We had one from Wes I always have to do the math for Emilio because it's like time difference. But at 11:30, Wes says, hey there, this was from YouTube. How do I deal with the OCD when it feels so real? I feel in those moments that I'm actually going to act or want to. Please help. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Like we do great in session, like conceptualizing OCD, understanding the thoughts. Well, how did we get here? Errors and stuff. But when you're in that moment, what helps, you know, when it feels so real?
I think for me, it was learning that OCD does feel very real. That was really helpful for me. So then I could clock it. If this is feeling real, this is probably my sign to disengage completely. If this is feeling real and I'm not in a situation where there's actual danger, like I really had to learn the difference between real alarms, false alarms. I think education on urges, and I put that in quotes because I don't really like urge as it relates to OCD, because I think urge implies like, I have the urge to go get El Pollo Loco, and that means you want to do it. I'm like, I do, by the way.
Same. I'm like, after
this, I don't care that it's 9:44 in the morning. We're getting some chicken. So I don't like that, because urge in the context of OCD is not something a person wants to do. This actually, when I was on Dak Shepard's podcast, he alerted me to what this is called. He calls it the call of the void, where like you're standing at a really tall, let's say the top of the Empire State Building, and you kind of feel like you could just like throw yourself off. You feel that pull, but you don't want to do it at all. It's kind of what it feels like for people with OCD. So learning that, yes, it can feel very real, but it's ultimately a really strong feeling paired with a scary thought, and not engaging when it feels so real. And I'll also say that when it feels so real, it's really hard to connect to what is rational and what is logical. I think that's the hard part of OCD for a lot of people. It's like, oh, but you know that you're not going to do that thing. You know that that's not relevant. Let's just resolve it. And then it feels so real. It's like, I can't connect to that when the fear center of my brain is so loud.
Yeah, I think the thing that helps as well is like, I'll ask clients when we're doing session together and they're feeling like this, I'm like, where's the danger? Like, point it to me, show me, like, we'll tackle it together. And they're like, well, it's not happening right now. And I'm like, I know, you're in my office, it's air conditioning, you're chilling on the couch, I have mints,
this is big living, right?
Yeah, right. And I'm like, but your brain is going off because it's telling you you're about to do this thing. I'm like, there's a big difference between it feeling real and you're chilling. And you got to learn, like you were saying, is like, there's a, like in this present moment, there is no danger. OCD struggles to live in the present because often the present is boring, right? Like you're just sitting on a couch, you're not doing the things your brain says.
Absolutely.
I'd love to get your opinion on this because I have my opinions, but at 11:53, C. Quaddy from YouTube says, if someone is looking into an IOP for OCD, would it be best for them to do an IOP that is specific for IOP? Or could they benefit from an IOP that is various diagnosis? So there's a lot of IOPs out there, or treatment centers out there where like you go and maybe you might be one of the only people with OCD. There's other people with schizophrenia or with depression or trauma or substance use. So from what you've heard from clients, if they do go to like a higher level of care, should they find something OCD specific, or should they go someplace that maybe does some OCD, but they do a bunch of other stuff too, if that person doesn't have those co-occurring conditions?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, if there's a co-occurring condition like OCD and eating disorders, and that place does that, brilliant. I often find that when it's a place that says they kind of treat everything intensively, they might not have as much experience with OCD. Like if OCD is one of 40 diagnoses listed, and you don't struggle with the other diagnoses, it might make more sense to find an OCD specific one where everybody on staff is specially trained to treat OCD.
Yeah, that's what I literally would have said. So I 100% agree. I've heard so many stories where people go and they get so little OCD treatment, or it's very just like manuals, old school ERP, and you could tell the person's probably in the back reading a manual. At 12:17, Alex, she wrote, said, how do you become an advocate for OCD and help others without being obsessed with the OCD and perhaps focusing too much on it? So Alex wrote that at 12:17.
I think for me, I got to the place where I wanted to do it. It didn't feel like OCD was consuming my life, if that makes sense. If I felt like I was still really struggling with OCD, but I kind of felt forced to advocate, that might not have been the time for me. And I also think I was at a great point in my recovery to start that advocacy work. Like I said, when I was pursuing a career as a therapist, I wanted nothing to do with OCD, like nothing at all. Because to me, it was like, I don't want to focus on it. I don't want to think about it. And then I got to a place of, wow, I'm in recovery and I really do want to. So I think it's just like listening to oneself and also maintaining a life outside of OCD. Like me and Chris don't just talk about OCD. We go to El Pollo Loco and then we talk about OCD while we're at a Pollo Loco.
I know. I still have the gift card you got me. And I'm like, it feels so much more cool to like order with a gift card. Because I'm like, oh, free El Pollo Loco. Oh my God. By the way, next time we hang out, it is ridiculous. When I went and got scanned because I have the app and it showed how much points I have, the lady was like, I've never seen that many points. I'm like, I have a problem. I have a problem.
You're like, I'm going to IOP for my El Pollo Loco.
My El Pollo Loco. You're the perfect person to answer this. So Crazy Girl on YouTube at 1221 says, I'm a lesbian and I have a fear of being heterosexual. So can you talk about sexual orientation OCD? Because I think traditionally we hear it as like, a straight male and he has a wife and kids, but fears he's being gay. But sexual orientation OCD is more expansive, as this person's experiencing.
Oh, I love when I saw that comment. Hello, queer queen. Yes, absolutely. That sexual orientation OCD absolutely can exist for people who are not straight, but we most often hear about it in the context of cisgender straight folks. So let's say I would consider myself pansexual, but let's say this person says I'm a lesbian and I keep getting unwanted thoughts about being heterosexual. That is very common. I think people use the term HOCD, which is really outdated, and they essentially call any kind of sexual orientation obsession like the fear of being gay, when that's not what it is for a lot of people. So I'm really glad that this person is openly discussing this. We need a lot more of that, and especially in regard to gender identity OCD. There are transgender folks who also have OCD surrounding, what if I shouldn't transition, even though they know that they really want to medically.
Yeah. No, it's huge and it's so expansive, and I'm glad that there's more and more conversations around it. I love this comment from Amy, and I have a question that I'm going to add to it. It's from 1230, and she says, "My OCD was unmanaged for 40 years before being able to take it on effectively. I came out better than I went in and have freedom from OCD." The reason I wanted to ask you this is I had someone that did an assessment with me who was in their early 70s, and they're like, what's the point? Like, why even get better? Why is it important at any age to seek out OCD recovery?
Sorry, I was reading a comment.
No, it's all good.
Um,
But for people like that, maybe because I think a lot of times people that seek out treatment a little bit later in life, they're like, what's the point? So why is it important for anyone at any age, even if you've been struggling for multiple years, to get treatment?
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, what I often see is like, if I've been struggling for so long, it means I can't get better. When I was interning at UCLA in their intensive outpatient program, there were like 75-year-olds getting treatment for the first time. And you can still get better no matter how long that you've been struggling. Neuroplasticity exists. And so why suffer more? I think there's that sunk cost fallacy of like, well, I've already gone 40 years, may as well go the rest of my life. But no, what if you could have the next 30 years of your life without struggling in that way?
Yeah. I think also, sure, it's a little challenging because now you've had 40 years of OCD and there's a lot of just kind of things that you're used to doing, sometimes habits that you have to
Oh,
overcome.
for sure. And I do want to validate, like 40 years for sure. It's like that pathway is ingrained, but it is absolutely possible to get out of that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're saying that because I think sometimes people think like, oh, I've gone this long with it. What's the point? And it's like, no, you can have so many more great years. Mauricio on YouTube asks at 1244, hello, how do you deal with verbal compulsion? So for example, when you ask the same thing over and over, and it's important to say, it happens more when there's a name of a person. I'm afraid to speak in the phrase. So like people that feel like they have to repeat themselves, especially to make sure the other person heard them properly, or like saying it just right. Like how can somebody work on compulsions around like saying things perfectly verbal?
So exposure and response prevention, right? Exposure might be saying it once. Response prevention is I'm not going to repeat myself, even though I feel the urge to. And that's the thing about OCD treatment is or OCD in general is the content, of course, is different, but the treatment is very much so the same when you look at the process of how OCD works.
Yeah, exactly. The next comment, somebody likes our OCD is a master propagandist, a bad smear campaign PR, so like that. At 1251 from Michael Alc, it says, I think there's a bright spot here. As a therapist, it's common for people with OCD to forget their gifts of sensitivity, brilliance, and creativity. And I think that's why, as a therapist, it's great to not just think about OCD treatment, but more broad, holistic treatment. And then he goes on to say, right after, I would love the OCD community to embrace more of these gifts and highlighting them.
I have some thoughts about that. I don't want to invalidate this person's lived experience. If they feel like OCD was a gift or OCD offered them a lot of gifts, I think that that is wonderful and that can be healing. For me, OCD did not give me brilliance. It did not give me sensitivity. It did not give me creativity. I mean, it almost killed me. So I don't find gifts in that. I don't need to look for gifts in that. I think that, recovering from OCD, I did that. I am strong, I am brilliant, I am creative, not because of my OCD or despite my OCD, just because that's the kind of person that I am. So I think when people say things like OCD is a superpower and it makes you this really empathetic person and like I already had a lot of empathy. OCD, if anything, like robbed me of what I knew about myself. So I think it can be helpful to some to look at OCD as a superpower or a gift. But for me, OCD did not give me any of that. That was who I already was. And OCD just kind of destroyed my life. So that's just kind of my response. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, no, it was making me think. Chrissy, our good friend Chrissy Hodges, we had a panel, and I cannot for the life of me, I was racking my brain who else was on the panel, but we had this discussion. Somebody was saying, I don't remember if it was on the panel or somebody was saying in the audience, they're saying, although I don't like OCD, I feel like it's given me a lot of gifts. And that's sort of what Chrissy and I were saying is like, I never give OCD credit for anything. OCD didn't do crap for me except make my life terrible. I think we all as people have certain gifts. So one of the things that I really like as if I'm propping myself up, one of the things I like about me as a person is I don't like to see people I care about struggling. Like I'll drop what I'm doing unless I'm sick, but I'll drop what I'm doing and like show up, call, like be there for people. And like it makes me happy to like make my friends happy, people in my life. What did OCD do? It ran with that shit. Like it made me call people a million times, apologize, always worry I'm hurting people's feelings. So I think what OCD is a master of, it's taking these abilities that we have, whether we're really good at something or we're super into our faith or we're, care about our pets, right? And then it takes that thing we care about and it takes it to like a negative zone. And so I do think that all of us that have gone through OCD treatment have created some strengths and some gifts, but it's because we chose to like show up, do the work, get better. So what I said on that panel and what I'll say now is like, I never give OCD credit for anything because, I don't give my depression credit, right? Like the depression hasn't done anything for me either. I think me learning strategies and tools and fighting back has given me something that I've overcome. It's given me strength. It's giving me pride in like the work I put in. But I wouldn't say OCD did that. I would say OCD took gifts I already had and just took them to a level that they suddenly became unhelpful.
Absolutely. And I think that I think this person is saying the upside of OCD and sensitivity that might be underneath, and like there are gifts underneath the OCD, but I would still kind of say the same thing. Like I wouldn't look at that as a gift. I would just look at that as who I was, and OCD tried to rob me of that. So yeah, and I think we have to be really careful when using like the upside of OCD when that is a condition that leads to a lot of suicidal ideation and sometimes death. I think that there are ways to phrase it, but I get very sensitive to language like that because there was just nothing about it that was a superpower or, a gift to me.
Yeah, like my mom will say a lot of times she's like, she's like OCD treatment. That's usually what she'll call it. Made me a better person. And she's like, it's not that the OCD did. But I think because she says, Chris, because you went through something like, let's talk about sensitivity, right? Like when we as people go through struggles, we empathize with other struggles. Even if we haven't gone through that exact struggle, like we could put ourselves there and say, hey, maybe there's a reason this person's acting like this, or like, let's not judge that person right away. They could be going through something. So I think having a disorder and then getting treatment can help you like have an understanding that people do struggle. But I agree with you. I've never wanted to give OCD credit. Like I've always, when people will ask me like, what's the one thing in life you regret? I'm like, that I didn't find out I had OCD the next day and get rid of that crap. Right. So for me, I give the credit to me, my team, my support, support system versus the condition itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Carmine at 1253 says, how about real event OCD about things that have actually happened in the past?
Oh my God, I love this one. Yes, OCD can absolutely latch on to things that happened in the past, and that thing really happened. But then what tends to occur is like the story that we are buying into about the thing that happened um, is sorry, I'm reading. There's just like an onslaught of comments right now. I wish I could turn off these comments so I can't.
Oh, if you click on people, then you just see our private conversations.
Okay, thank God. Okay, now I see this. The story that we buy into about OCD and the thing that, actually happened, that is what is obsessional. So it's either this, like, I can't stop thinking about this thing in the past, or it's this thing actually happened, but now I'm telling myself that I'm a predator and a monster, and that's what needs to be worked through.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too about real event OCD from the past is it's typically many years previously, and at the time it didn't really trigger anything. And now we're going back there, and OCD is going to fill in the blanks, and that's the scariest part because OCD is going to sit there and start telling you like, "Oh, this happened or that happened." And I always tell people it's like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It's going to get so blurry to the point that you can't remember it, and that's the most paradoxical thing about OCD is the harder you try to remember, the worse it gets.
100%. Yeah.
I know you talk about this a lot. At Alex, she wrote at 1254 said, learning about plasticity was life changing for me. Knowing we can rewire our brains gives a lot of hope. I read a book. It's called Rewire Your OCD Brain. Did that help you? Like just learning about neuroplasticity?
Oh my gosh, so much, because I was so convinced, both in my eating disorder and OCD, that I was just going to be stuck like this forever. I remember asking my therapist, like, am I ever going to not think in this way? And she said, well, think back to your eating disorder. Isn't that what you thought about that as well? And it was true. Like, I really did use that to help me with my OCD, because I got to a point where food and body weren't taking up my entire day. And there was actually an article in the treatment manual that my therapist gave me. It was something like, for the obsessed, the mind can fix the brain. And it talked about like ERP and neuroplasticity. And that helped me so much, just knowing that the brain really can change and we don't need to live like this forever.
Yeah. I wanted I think, and that's the hope that I give people is like with neuroplasticity, it doesn't mean like you're learning how to kind of deal with your thoughts and your feelings for life. Like in 40 years, you're going to be doing the same thing. It's like the brain starts to, what I call is like, in quotes, like heal itself. Like you get to a point where now when I'm around certain people, I don't even get thoughts and feelings anymore. It's not like I still do and I have to work through it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Like the brain really can change in that way.
Yeah. Spence asked me at 1258, Chris, did any of your training in martial arts give you insights in battling OCD? I mean, I think it did, right? Like the mindfulness piece that I talked about, like really being in the present, letting things go, the breathing element, because I think breathing really helps. But I think ultimately we all need to conceptualize this condition. And I think martial arts gave me a confidence, especially when I had black belts trying to swing at me and I had to dodge, right? But for me, I think it just, I would think of things like the OCD being on the punching bag and being like, not today, not today. Is there anything for you, Allegra, like in your own life outside of like treatment that you feel just like really helps you be at peace or helps you with your mental health?
Yeah, I mean, that has shifted depending on like where I'm at in treatment. I would say moving my body sometimes really helps. Love a hot girl walk. I actually just taught my 69-year-old therapist what a hot girl walk is. She's like, what is it? I'm like, you're hot and you take a walk around the neighborhood. What do you mean? I love a hot girl walk. I love to read. So really just making time for things that are enjoyable to me, taking care of myself. Sleep is a really, like, I need sleep. I don't care what people say. I need like 10 hours a night or else. Okay. Chris, I know you know.
Yes.
So I need to keep up with like everything that's happening in my life, so that I feel like I can maintain my symptoms. Yeah, I would say just like basic self-care, reading, walking, etc.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do is I want to give you the floor to take us out. Is there any message? Obviously, first and foremost, where can people find you? Where can people keep up with you? And then any final message you'd like to leave everybody with, just to kind of give them some hope for their week.
Definitely. I would say that it gets so much better, even if you don't believe it. If you feel like you're someone who is special, I thought I was a special, unique case, and I definitely wasn't. So there is so much hope. Treatment can be so effective. And that, I think, would be the main thing that I want people to know.
Yeah. And where can people keep up with you?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Instagram at Allegra Castins, TikTok at Allegra Castins. I am not on Twitter. I just deleted. Not, not ideal at this point in my life. And I did just join Substack. Very interesting. So you can find some of my writing on there. My website, allegracastins.com, OCD and anxietytherapy.com, and my book sometime in 2026 when I finish it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody that came and hung out with us. We loved your comments. We loved your questions. We loved the support you gave each other in the chat. If you found any of this helpful, or if you joined us a little bit late, you can watch this back either on our YouTube, which is youtube.com/IOCDF, or Facebook. If you go to Facebook, IOCDF, and you look under videos or live, you'll see that. You can also share this with others and it'll be up there for you to watch. Thank you so much to our special guest, Allegra. She's incredible, good friend of mine and a good friend of the community, does so much for us and really gets the word out. We're so excited to have you. And we are here every Wednesday, so make sure you join us. And if you want more information about the live streams, just go to iocdf.org/live streams. And then, of course, you can go to iocdf.org for everything OCD. We hope to see you back in a future live stream. Obviously, Allegra, you better come back. And thank you so much for everybody joining us today. And Allegra and I are proof that you can get better. So please, please, please believe in recovery. Take care, everyone, and thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Allegra, Coco, and Ruby.